Welcome to Upthinking Finance, a podcast that offers a unique and discerning view of economics and financial planning. Here is your host, Emerson Fersch.
Welcome to another episode of Upthinking Finance. Advisor coach Nick Murray once said, "Optimism is the only realism." So today's guest, I'm happy to welcome back my friend and associate, colleague, a friend from across the other side of the Atlantic, Alex Krainer. He's a former futures trader, hedge fund manager, market analyst. He's written 3 books that have all been canceled by Amazon. So if you're looking for instant credibility, there's that. He also runs Krainer Analytics and produces the Trend Compass report, to which we are subscribers. And most importantly, he's the father of 2 boys. So Alex, are you in the beautiful Principality of Monaco today?
I am in the beautiful Principality of Monaco. Good to join you today, Emerson, as always. And my warm greetings from Monaco to everybody listening or watching.
Well, thank you. No, I appreciate your time. So, I mean, there's just not really a lack of things to talk about. And I know you speak really regularly on particularly on geopolitical things. And so I thought maybe we could spend some time on sort of the financial angles of things. But let's start off with the Epstein list. Which of course, we could spend 3 hours talking about that, as you probably have already. But aside from all the depravity, one of the takeaways that seems to be emerging from people who are digging into this stuff beyond just all the darkness is this Lord Peter Mandelson, or Petey, I guess as he was called. And, he was found on the list, and I was hoping maybe you could educate people that aren't familiar with him, why this is economically significant, and maybe what his role was, and the fact that he's resigned, how that potentially impacts things going forward, particularly in the UK.
Well, that's a great question, Emerson. It's a massive can of worms, and I think it would be extremely difficult to predict how it unravels, because Lord Peter Mandelson is one of the kingpins of the British political establishment. He's extremely close to Tony Blair. He used to be part of his government and part of the, a part of the cabinet in Tony Blair's government and the successor, Gordon Brown government. He was very close to Lord Jacob Rothschild. And then, of course, he was also very close to Jeffrey Epstein, who was partly funded by the Rothschild family. As far as documentary evidence goes, we know that there was Ariane de Rothschild, the widow of Benjamin Rothschild from Geneva. But we're talking some very, very powerful people in both the British political establishment and in the global banking establishment. And the fact that their setup is now under attack, and that it's at least partly unraveling, is I think a massive blow to them. And I think we haven't seen the full extent of it yet, because there are still many people who aren't fully aware of all this. There's still a segment of the population that should be outraged, but they aren't, because in part they're in disbelief, in part they're digesting the information, in part they don't even know that it's happening. People who watch television and read newspapers, they don't even know that any of this is happening. They're not necessarily aware that there was a man named Jeffrey Epstein, or still is. And they still think that, no, come on, this couldn't possibly be true. I mean, who eats babies, really? Come on, you must be mad. But I think it's slowly dawning on a significant segment of the population that this is real. And one of the big impacts is going to be that it pulls the rug from under our, not just in the UK, but I think in general in Europe, the legitimacy of our governance structures in general. I hear people saying, "Do you realize we're paying taxes to pedophiles?" Like a glib, simple sentence, but It's actually quite profound. And once you're aware of it, you can't forget. So now what happens if Emmanuel Macron says, to the trenches we have to defend against, the invading Russian hordes? Who's going to go? Or if they say like, oh my gosh, we have a pandemic, everybody has to, social distance, mask up and all this. Or they say, oh, we have to do away with fossil fuel cars, internal combustion engines, and go with solar. There's almost a total loss of credibility for this whole class of people. I don't know that this has ever happened in history. I mean, maybe it has at some point, but I don't think it did, because an essential part of all this, this whole process, is the internet and the social media platforms, which we never had before. So it's impossible to even kind of try to predict where this goes. I'll finish with this because it's really important. I believe that the British establishment is under attack. And I think that it's under attack by the Trump administration, probably in cahoots with the Russian government, and very possibly in cahoots with the Chinese government. And I'll explain why, because this is really important. So, you know how in the United States, so now this Epstein saga is now opening up and unraveling, is coming into the light. But then you also have these uncontrolled migrations, right? And the actions by the ICE. And we're uncovering that the United States, in a way, has been under attack by Mexican drug cartels from the south of its border and from the north of its border, right? Because Mexican cartels had major operations in Canada, and they had these really, really large labs when they were making fentanyl and meth and all kinds of stuff, and pot as well, and making something close to $65-70 billion a year in the United States. And we discovered that this was all linked to Canadian money laundering banks, because without the money laundering, nothing happens. And then a lot of this money was going through London controlled offshore centers. There's the city of London back in the 1960s has created 14 offshore banking centers where there's anything between 50 and 75 trillion US dollars sloshing around, completely untransparent, not under control of any government, let alone the US government. And now what's happening in the UK, and I mean, this network launders money for Mexican drug cartels, which is, Mexican drug cartels, they don't only smuggle drugs, they also run the logistical operation for these this uncontrolled illegal immigration into the United States. They traffic people. They engage in all kinds of fraud, like insurance fraud, and they engage in protection racketeering, abductions, kidnappings, and so it's actually like a very large, but also very sophisticated organized crime operation. The same thing has been happening in the UK, only a little bit different. They had these so-called grooming gangs. But these grooming gangs were also extraordinarily sophisticated, as, now there's a private investigative effort being ran by one of the members of parliament. His name is Rupert Lowe. And he's running like a 10-day inquiry. And what they're finding out is that there's a pattern to the way, this is not just spontaneous organized crime. This is very well organized. It's run across the United Kingdom, and it's also VAT fraud, tax fraud, benefits fraud. So wherever, it's almost as if they identified the weak points in the systems in the system setup of the government, of the whole social contract, and they're exploiting them. And so they're generating hundreds of millions of pounds. Part of it is grooming, so rape of English girls, serial rape of English girls. That's at least 15,000 English girls have been victimized by these networks. But then they also smuggle drugs. They do tax fraud, VAT fraud, benefits fraud, several other forms of crime. But then, all of this money gets laundered again through the banks. And I'll bring it back to why I think that this whole setup is under attack by the Trump administration. Because the grooming gang scandal, it started in the 1970s. Well, that is, the grooming gangs organizations started in the 1970s. They grew into a scandal between, let's say, early 2000s, like 2001, 2002, 2003, and then there were some prosecutions, but then a man called Keir Starmer became the director of public DPP, director of public prosecutions, and then he shut it all down, and he issued reporting restrictions so that British media could not report on these cases. So he really shielded the grooming gangs, and as a result, many people in the United Kingdom aren't really aware of this problem, even though people who looked into it have called it the greatest peacetime crime in the British history. And so the cover-up has been spearheaded by Sir Keir Starmer, who is now the Prime Minister, and his predecessor, Gordon Brown, who was, Prime Minister before him and after Tony Blair. And the story was systematically covered up, and British media pushed it into the memory hole. So it kind of withered. It kind of became a non-thing, and many people were, that's a conspiracy theory. People are just being racist because they're accusing, these immigrants from Pakistan and Bangladesh for doing this. But it's it's kind of like urban legend and a myth. Well, okay, so after Donald Trump got elected, all of a sudden, Elon Musk, of all people, starts tweeting on a regular basis about this. So he brings it back up, like the whole thing blows the lid off of the cover-up and starts attacking the Sir Keir Starmer, but not only him, basically the whole British establishment. And I have to read one of the tweets he had pinned in the early last year, so early in 2025, because it's absolutely spectacular. Like at the time, I thought Elon Musk was simply trolling the Brits. Now, I think this was he was giving away the Trump administration's actual intentions. Why can I not find it now? Okay, basically out of my memory, because I remember it fairly well. Elon Musk had a pinned tweet that was a statement, and then it was a poll because people could answer yes or no. And the tweet said, the United States should liberate the people of Great Britain from their tyrannical government. I think that's very close to word for word. That was his pinned tweet. and it was pinned long enough that he got 2 million responses, and 58% of the people answered yes. And this was before, Epstein thing came out. And this was before the grooming gang scandal got reheated. And so Sir Keir Starmer, Gordon Brown, both were closely involved. Both were very close to Peter Mandelson. Peter Mandelson is close with Keir Starmer, and Peter Mandelson was also close to the Rothschild family, who funded Jeffrey Epstein. As far as we know, at least $25 million. And so it seems that this whole criminal enterprise, and Rupert Law rightly says, it seems that the British government has fallen into the hands of organized crime because it's the Canadian operations, it's the offshore money laundering operations, it's the grooming gangs in the United Kingdom, it's the Mexican drug cartels, all manner of organized crime worldwide seems to be part of this. And it appears that the proceeds, the money laundered from all this criminal activity finds its way back to the City of London and these 14 financial centers that are offshore. And apparently, according to British investigators, that amounts to about $350 billion per year. Lord Peter Mandelson appears to have been one of the most important people in this whole organization. And the fact that he went down now is very interesting because, it's hard to say whether he was taken out deliberately and knowingly, or if things just happened this way because, it appeared that Trump was very reluctant to release the Epstein file. But almost as soon as they were released, boom, Peter Mandelson goes down. Morgan McSweeney, who is one of the behind-the-scenes organizers and gray eminences of the British Keir Starmer government and a protege of Lord Peter Mandelson, he goes down. There are more heads have rolled in France, in Germany, in Romania, maybe one of the Eastern European countries and so forth. And this thing has only started. And I think inevitably is going to have consequences for European and US and Canadian economies. And it's not going to boost confidence in their credit or in their currency. So I think over time, this might turn out to be a bumpy ride. And then last thing I'll mention is that somehow Jeffrey Epstein seems to have been very involved with development of Bitcoin. And as we've seen, Bitcoin has taken a massive tumble. I mean, last summer it was trading at 120,000. Now it's around 65,000. So it's nearly 50% down. We'll see where it goes. Could it go to zero? I don't know, but conceivably it could. It's a useful technology, but it's a limited supply of nothing. And if people lose confidence or if they start suspecting that it's some kind of a nefarious thing, they might bail in large numbers.
Boy, that's a big dose.
Yes, it is. It is.
Yeah.
But I think it's, this could be one of those once in a century events that is, it's like a slow motion train wreck. It doesn't happen from one day to the next, but it is happening. And I think that, fortunately for ordinary people, it seems to me that at the very least, the Russian government and the Trump administration have very good clarity about who the enemy is and the nature of their business. And I think that they are committed to routing them out. That should be good news for all the rest of us.
Yeah. No, I was just thinking, gosh, you said a lot right there. You know, you're mentioning, you know, that's the thing is I think so many of us, and, you know, I mean, I was a product of that kind of system. You sort of you'd hear things, but if it didn't affect you, you know, you just kind of ignore it. But now the world we live in, you know, there's so much noise because, you know, I mean, I'm not a social media guy, but I got an Instagram because my wife will send me stuff from time to time. And you start noticing the pattern of things, and then you start noticing it's very much like the mainstream media. You all of a sudden get these very one-sided views that seem mainstream, but they're not, or you know, the context is really limited, and it's you know, and it's and so you have to pay attention, I guess is my point. And you brought up banks and money laundering, and I just happened to look up while we were talking. You know, Toronto Dominion Bank settled a $3 billion lawsuit last year, or actually 2024, a year and a half ago, for $3 billion for money laundering. And, you'd think on the surface, that's a big deal. I mean, 3 billion is not chump change. I mean,
Yes.
that's a lot of money for anybody. And so obviously there's something there. And yet, but that's a little thing, but then you forget about it. But like you were doing, you start connecting all these events, and you start to see a pattern, but it takes a tremendous amount of work because there's so much noise, there's so much misinformation, and people accusing information of being misinformation, and it can be very confusing.
Yes.
Know.
And another thing, Emerson, the whole concept of money laundering seems very abstract to people, because it's something, you bring money to the bank and then they make it clean money, and it doesn't seem like it's particularly bad. Nobody dies, nobody gets killed. It's some kind of an abstract white collar victimless crime. It appears like a victimless crime, but it's not.
Until you consider where the money's coming from.
Exactly. And so it is very important to understand. And not only, it also reveals the nature of the organized crime structures. Because, you see, Mexican drug cartels, according to General McCaffrey's investigation back in 2008 or 2009, they were generating $450 million a week. So Mexican drug cartels were generating $450 million in cash weekly. And they were repatriating a large amount of that money back to Mexico, meaning they literally had to drive truckloads full of cash across the border. And then now you have hundreds of millions of dollars in cash that you have to do something with. You have to store it somewhere. So they had to store that money. And then once you do that, you have to put men to guard that money, right? So normally, that would be very hard to keep secret. And it would become a magnet for, enterprising law enforcement people or military people or rival cartel gangs, or just, like if I'm a cartel boss and you are my henchman, and I say, Emerson, go, there's like a couple of $1 billion in that warehouse. Get a bunch of men that you trust and go guard that money. Make sure that it's safeguarded. So, everybody's loyalty has a price. And you might think, okay, Alex, we're good friends. I work for you, but my opportunity is to just take that few $1 billion and declare my own independence and my own cartel, go independent. So if the cartels had to operate in cash, they would very quickly splinter into 1,000 rival groups that would probably eliminate one another to a large extent. They would fight between themselves for all this. And then whatever would be left over would probably be much easier for law enforcement to mop up. But when they take money to a money laundering bank, somebody gets signature on those accounts. So now you have billions of dollars sitting in a bank account. They've been laundered, they've been cleaned up, and now they appear like legitimate money belonging to some company or some wealthy businessman in Mexico. And now, let's say if I am El Chapo Guzman, I have signature on that money, or my CFO. So I have to just make sure that my CFO is loyal to me. And so now everybody who gets a paycheck from me depends on me. Why is this important? Because it is the bank who anoints me as the top of that whole hierarchy. So the bank accepts my signature and says, right, we will honor these checks, we will execute these transfers, we will approve these purchases. All of this suggests that the real organized crime bosses are banks, the bank CEOs, because there's no chance, there's legally no possibility, it's inconceivable that they don't know the nature of this business. They're obliged to know it. Like if a client brings you $450 million a week in whatever form, even the CEO of HSBC or Barclays Banks has to be aware of their business, has to know who they are and what they do. That's KYC. That's know your client legal requirement. So they must know, and they do know, but they nevertheless protect this business. And they protect it obviously because it generates an enormous amount of cash for them. And then, another benefit is that if bank abuses the relationship, it's not like the drug cartels can go to the police and complain or sue them in the court of law. They are in completely subordinated position to the bank. Anyway, Emerson, I'm saying all this because it's happening as we speak. Yeah. All of this is unraveling as we speak. It's going to have enormous consequences. So it's not just, an interesting story about some organized crime thing that happened in Colombia or something, like Pablo Escobar and crime stories like this. It's a massive story that it's going to have very far-reaching consequences that we are going to feel, because they might end up impacting the credit markets in Europe and the United States. They might impact stock markets. They might they might lead to a collapse of the whole British system of government. I don't mean fall of the Keir Starmer government and then Tories coming back to 10 Downing Street. I mean a complete revolution and a complete overhaul of the whole governing structure in the United Kingdom. That means the collapse of the Commonwealth, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and all these dependencies. Suddenly they're on the loose. And then suddenly the United States has the opportunity to absorb some of that, i.e. Canada, and I'm very certain that people in the Trump administration are wargaming all of this.
So, yeah, this brings me to the point we were talking about a little bit before we started, which is, people will ask, well, what do you think's going to happen? And there's always, because I was going to get into Japan, but already we're running up against it. Because you had brought up about, and that's a common theme from the economic side of things. Japan's now, the yen's starting to go up. Their interest rates are yield curve controls. They've been negative. People have leveraged all this currency at these low rates and reinvested everywhere. And now the value of that leverage is going down. And, you had indicated, and these are my words, I'm really glossing over some specifics, that might be the first global economic domino to fall. But so there's that part of it, right? There's that side of it, but then there's all this other stuff you're talking about, which is real and valid. And how do you plan financially, for those kind of consequences? And you can't. You literally can't. People, I mean, the old thing is, well, buy gold because, you'll be able to, no. My advice is always get 6 months of food storage if you're really worried about it, and, hunker down and, pray a lot. Anyway, and so let's just, I guess the other thing I was going to get to, and you sort of led into it, which is, you did some writing about the Davos conference, and I'm again just really summarizing, but the vibe I got from your commentary was that there's a bit of a turning point, it seems, that's going on. That globalism is, we're burying it in the hole and putting the dirt on it at this point. Maybe kind of tie that in, because that seems to be where this is headed.
Yeah. That's probably the best news of this year, Emerson. And I was because Trump, from the time he won the election, the talk has been, I want to turn the United States into the industrial powerhouse of the world. I want to bring back manufacturing jobs. I want to bring back the industries. We need to fix the infrastructure and so forth. But this was just statements that sounded as though they might have been election slogans or a way to placate his voters or to say nice stuff that people are going to like to hear and so forth. But when he went to Davos, he led a delegation of 300 people, and they made this very explicit. Not so much Trump, but people like Scott Bessent and Howard Lutnick. And then there was Jamieson Greer, who is the Secretary of Trade, who gave a whole speech about this. Now, this is another hugely important issue, because in terms of political and economic governance, every nation has a choice between two systems. One is the British system of free trade, meaning goods, services, and capital flow across the world with minimum impediments. Investors just, shift money. Now it's invested in the United States. Now it goes to China. Now it goes to Bangladesh or wherever. And basically, every nation is supposed to have its market open for the most competitive price of goods. So, if you produce something in the United States like cars or musical instruments or whatever, but your market is open, and then, if people from China come in with cars that are half the price of your car and they're just as good as yours, well, then you're out of business. And so basically this British system of free trade should rightfully be called the system of race to the bottom. And that's exactly what Jamieson Greer called it at Davos. It's like a downward race to the bottom, meaning you need to compete for capital, for financial capital. And how do you do that? Well, you lower the cost of labor. You lower the cost of commodities. How do you do that? By eliminating environmental standards, eliminating safety standards, reducing people's wages, taking away their healthcare, taking away their pensions, benefits, free education. All of those things that a modern society, which is enormously profitable, should have. But instead, we're always used to being on the verge of being broke, right? It's always a crisis. It's always hard. Once upon a time, you could raise a family on one income. Today, you struggle with two incomes. So that's the effect of this system of free trade, which has been dominant in the Western world pretty much since World War II. It's been gaining ground. The alternative to this system is the American system. And it's called American system because it was it was first introduced by Alexander Hamilton, who was George Washington's the first Treasury Secretary under George Washington's government. And that has implementing the American system means creating a protected market for domestic producers and for domestic businesses, right? You impose tariffs so that domestic producers don't have to compete with the low-cost producer anywhere else in the world, which means that they have a business in their domestic economy, which means that they can hire people and pay them good wages, which also means that capital cannot freely flow wherever. It must be invested at home, which means that you start upgrading your infrastructure, you start issuing credit to small and medium-sized businesses. So, people have jobs, prosperity and standards of living goes up, infrastructure in the nation improves, and everywhere where this has been implemented, United States, Italy, Germany, Russia, China, Japan, it has had the same exact effects, meaning it uplifts a nation in terms of prosperity, technological advancement, all of those good things, all of the things that people want. But it's not a situation where the democratically elected government in some country says, well, maybe we should give up on this free trade system and go with the American system instead. Because all 8 presidents of the United States who have either been killed while in the office or died under suspicious circumstances, all 8 of them, in one way or another, tried to implement the American system. And even the Civil War in 1860s was fought over this issue, essentially. So it's not that, the global empire, the rules-based world order just says, well, okay, if you decided like that, good luck to you and let us know how it goes. No, they will fight you. They will try to, they tried to assassinate Trump already twice. And, many people feel that United States is at risk of civil war. This is why. But you see what happened in Davos? The Trump administration openly declared that they are switching. They said, Lutnick said, flat in their faces at Davos, which is, a gathering of free trade people, right? He said, globalism is dead. Your thinking is wrong. We're completely changing the system. And then Jameson Greer, when he gave his speech, he explicitly mentioned by name, what do you call him? Alexander Hamilton. He said, Hamiltonian system is the winner. That's what we want to pursue. And he mentioned Henry Carey, who was Abraham Lincoln's economic advisor. Abraham Lincoln was trying to implement the American system and did with much success, and so forth. So that was practically a declaration of war to the global empire. I mean, not practically, it was a declaration of war.
Well, here's a simple thing. You for anybody who's just trying to connect these dots, if the special interests that you mentioned in the environmental regulations and all these layers and layers and layers of red tape that is ultimately benefiting somebody, right? You remove all that, and then all of a sudden you've got this small business owner who can pay their lifestyle may not, they have control over how much they pay their employees, and they can afford to pay more because they want to keep certain people, you know what I mean? But when you start burning people, right, with all these just costs to just exist, like you're saying, you remove it. You do, and somebody suffers, and then effectively you got what we have now. You got the haves and the have-nots, and the haves, of course, are benefiting from all these little taxes and building permits and whatever. I'm making stuff up, but the whole point of it is that, of course, they're going to go down kicking and screaming because that's that's how they're benefiting.
Exactly, because, the free trade system has been pervasive in the world, predominant in the world since practically the end of the Second World War. And people who are by today the wealthiest and the most powerful have been the beneficiaries of that system, and they're horrified that Trump wants to go to the American system, that he wants to reindustrial the nation, that he's introducing tariffs, and they're screaming bloody murder, and they're trying to take Trump down to delegitimize him. Somebody tried to kill him twice. And then, the United States is the most important battlefield in this struggle. It was always going to come to this.
Yeah, you mentioned that when we've started these conversations a few years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, remember? And there was Che Guevara, the Cuban revolutionary, who always said, I envy you Americans. You are fighting the most important fight of all. Most people didn't understand this, but I think they're beginning to. And he was right, he got a lot of stuff wrong, but this one he got right. This is the most important fight of all.
So two thoughts come to mind as we kind of wind down here. One is 1 Timothy 6:10, the love of money is the root of all evil. I mean, that sounds like probably the wisest scripture in the Bible, at least as far as what we're living right now. But number two, and I was gonna, it kind of feels like, and I'm always trying to find original ways to say things, but I'm not really that great at it. It kind of feels like we're at the end of the line, for lack of a better way to put it. And so in that sense, you look at the financial markets, because I made a commitment to make sure we talked some economics in here somewhere, which, I mean, it all intertwines, it's, but what do the markets tell you when you consider all this? Because I mentioned Japan, you've got commodity markets, metals particularly, as we've discussed on and off over the last few months, just going nutso. I mean, crazy. What do you call them? Hockey stick performance, straight up.
Yeah.
You're starting to see the energy markets go up, the oil markets and gas, which is kind of interesting because they don't, usually from what I've learned as I've been more exposed to this the last few years, is it seems like it's more these geopolitical extremes with, the Middle East and war and these things. And yet it seems like it's more of a kind of a stable, slow and steady kind of a thing of late. And then of course you got the equity markets that, continue to be pretty resilient. What do you read out of all that? Because again, I go back to what I said earlier. It's really hard to plan when, in a world where really, I think if you take the sum total of all of it, geopolitical stuff, the corruption that's getting exposed, that's always been there. And then of course, like I said, you tie in what's going on financially. I mean, is there a way to really kind of what's your read on it? I mean, I don't know a better way to ask the question.
Well, I think that for sure we're going into a period of high volatility in the markets, because I think that market participants are more emotional than they otherwise are. We see that many markets go into, when they go into an uptrend, they go into like this vertical climb at some point, and then they're very, very sharp corrections and reversals. And so I think, I always believe in trend following, because we don't necessarily know what's going to happen, and we don't know how to predict exactly how markets are going to go. But it's pretty clear that for millennia, trends have always defined the direction, because trends reflect collective wisdom of all market participants. So the way people look at it is that's how the market moves. So it's always okay to kind of raise your sails in that direction. But I think that in this particular period, when, rather than markets kind of moving in that direction in some slow, steady way as they normally do, it's kind of like a slow motion, like an iceberg moving. The glacier, it always has a glacial pace. Now it's very, very quick.
So Amy and I were talking about this yesterday, and I think there's and I'll speak for me. I don't think, and I don't know that I've ever embraced, and I don't think you have either, necessarily the whole financial system collapsing. I think the worry, or not the worry, but the concern is it really comes down to how people react. I mean, at the end of the day, it all gets back to emotions. And one thing I've observed that in my, I mean, you and I have similar tenure in this industry, um, is people seem to be able to, there's kind of two foundational pieces for people that really can get through turbulent times. One is they're tethered to some kind of actual goal, some kind of a purpose that you can go back
Yes.
to. And number two is some kind of a spiritual foundation. I think, and you use that thing about putting your sails up, and I feel like when you've got something that you're tethered to, that anchors you in the midst of calamity and storms, that this is bigger. There's something bigger than whatever the moment is, and the moment can be bad. I mean, I remember 08, 09, and I had some. I remember one guy called me what do you call me, a Pollyanna, and it was just the whole idea of, no, really, and he couldn't. It was too much for him emotionally, and he just kind of pulled the plug. And there's a few people at that time, but then there were a lot of others who just were more grounded in different things that have come back years later. I mean, I still hear from people, I remember what you told me, in the great financial crisis, and we stuck with things. And it doesn't mean you can't. I think the difference today is there's got to be some nuance. We talked about metals. I think I'm with you with the trend following. We were talking about it before this conversation, and just the ability to rely on something that doesn't have an opinion. you know,
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't have opinion and doesn't have emotion.
Yeah, exactly right. And Napier always talks about that. His comment, one of the things he always says is look at the incentive. What's the incentive of whoever's giving whatever, and trend following has no incentive. It's following, an algorithm you put together, and that's it. And there's something pure about that, I guess is the word I like to use, because it's devoid of, as you said, devoid of emotion. And so you include these different things, and I think really that's the goal for people now, is with all of these things we've talked about, and I think there's a lot more that we don't even know. I mean, I've become convinced that what we're seeing wherever we're getting information is probably just it's scratching the surface of things, and either you're okay with that or you're not. And if you are, then what the advantage of it is to just you spread things out, you position for all these different outcomes, and at some point, you're going to have some kind of a position that's going to be, as you said, the opportunity side of the equation. So, anyway, sorry for that long rant, but I was just
No, that makes total sense.
so. At any rate, yeah, no, I listen. It's always good talking to you, Alex. It's hard to believe it's been 5 years almost since we met.
I know.
Yeah, can you believe it? And it's
Well, it hasn't been boring, right?
no,
That's why time goes so fast.
no, you're right. It hasn't been boring, and I'll go back to it. It's really was a divine appointment how we got connected, because
Yeah,
the timing of it, April of 2021, and just what's come out of it with the trend model, and just conversations and friendship and just perspectives. It's good to have people that see what's going on and aren't afraid to stick their neck out and say, really expose, connect all these dots. And I think, Luongo's very good. I know you do a lot of work with him, and he's a really good, I think, at connecting the geopolitical events. And there's another person too, that my wife's actually been connected to. She goes by Prometheus, I think, on X.
oh, Promethean action. Susan Kokinda, perhaps.
Yes, yes. And so that's another one, who you start finding these people that can, have these conversations and frame things, and open your eyes. And, if there's one prayer I've got for anybody at this point in time, it's just to really have an open mind and be willing to detach from a lot of the stuff that, because I think, you got to, in order to move ahead, you've got to adapt and be willing to really just challenge everything. Certainly in our industry with the financial stuff, which is what the trend model does, but just in the way, the outlook and things, and really accepting that not everything is what it seems.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyhow, so if people are looking to get more regular content from you, I know you've been putting stuff out. Substack, I know I'll put the address on here, but just you're on Substack. Anywhere else that maybe people should be connected to that you would recommend?
Well, I'm active on X. My handle is @nakedhedgy, and I kind of relaunched my YouTube channel.
Oh,
But
good.
I think it's called Alex Krainer, just like that. There's another one called Alex Krainer Official, but that's fake. That's somebody's using my face, but it's all AI generated, and it's bizarre. Well, okay, whatever. But it's YouTube is a lot of work. So I managed to publish 2 videos in January. And it'll be I hope to ramp it up to 1 video per week, but it's a lot of hard work because like with text you can always, if you make a mistake, you can always go back, edit it, and correct it. With video, once it goes. You can't change it anymore.
That's
so
it.
it has to be perfect when it goes out, and getting to that is so much work. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And then if we were reading scriptures, my favorite one for these times is
Please.
Ephesians 6:10. Put on the whole armor of God. Remember that one?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It's time to put on the whole armor of God.
Amen. You know what? That's a good place to end. Alex, I always appreciate your time. Thanks for squeezing me into your schedule. And
The pleasure is mine, Emerson. Thank you. Thank you for having me. And until the next time, bye-bye.
God bless.
Emerson Fersch is a registered representative with and securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA, SIPC. Advisor services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor and separate entity from Capital Investment Advisors. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. The guest speakers and the companies they represent are not affiliated with or endorsed by LPL Financial or Capital Investment Advisors. Individual tax and legal matters should be discussed with your tax or legal expert. Economic forecasts set forth may not develop as predicted, and there can be no guarantee that strategies promoted will be successful. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. There is no assurance that the techniques and strategies discussed are suitable for all investors or will yield positive outcomes. The purchase of certain securities may be required to affect some of the strategies. Investing involves risks, including possible loss of principal.